Hi, James.
Hello,
How are you today?
I'm all right. I'm happy to see you, and I'm enjoying the comfort of these humongous headphones.
They are very large. It's so nice to see your face because normally we have all our calls on audio because we're
Yeah.
walking through forests or being out trying to be outside.
Well, I'd never actually seen you in person until I actually saw you in person. We had like a sort of audio pen pal relationship, I think.
Yeah. So I'm very excited you're here on the upfront moment. And you are a man. I mean, this is very unusual. This is a first. Very exciting. So yeah, where should we begin? Tell us your story, James. Who are
Hmm.
you? What do you care about?
Well, first of all, I feel very privileged to be here, and I'm definitely well aware of being the first man on this podcast. Yes, I'm excited and nervous, definitely.
Mm,
Where to start? I suppose, how would I describe myself? Entrepreneur would be the first thing that would come to mind. I think that's
mhm,
what, how I often describe myself or how a lot of people describe me. Started a couple of businesses, one out of university, which was a failure really and was a bit hollow. And then I think, well, what I'm most proud of is Sanctus, which is a business that I started 6 years ago off the back of my own issues with my mental health, and I've been a big part of the mental health movement in the last 6 years. So not just me, obviously, but a big community of people have come together and talked more openly about mental health and being honest and real and vulnerable. And
mm.
I've definitely been a part of that. And I suppose that's really opened my eyes and changed my life, really, to be honest. I think that's what's given much more range to my life and the issues I care about. I think
Mm.
I got into mental health because of my own struggles, and then starting there with my own emotional experience and then noticing how I respond to the world around me and stuff's just massively opened my eyes on loads of different levels in terms of the hobbies I have personally, the people I spend my time with, but then also loads of other like social injustices and things I care about. So I think that's me. More of course, but that's probably
Yeah.
enough for now.
And you've talked a lot quite openly recently in your newsletter, and obviously you're quite a prolific you write and share a lot about your journey and your learnings online. And you talked recently about your confidence
Mm.
and the kind of journey your confidence has gone on that you're currently on. Can you tell me a little bit about your relationship with confidence? Where's that at for you just
Well,
now in your life?
I'm glad you called me a writer because I definitely could have described myself as a writer, but that probably links to the confidence piece of I
Yeah.
sometimes I find it much more easy to describe myself as a founder or an entrepreneur, whereas a writer I feel more underconfident to describe myself as.
Mm.
Yeah, confident. I've always had a quite a strange relationship even with the word, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, I would have been described as and described myself as confident. Yeah, I think I just had one version of it, like that off at times bordered on arrogance, I think, of
Mm-hmm.
just like and faking it, just like
Mm.
pretending that I knew what I was doing or having this air of confidence. I think from sort of an early age, like even as early as a teenager, I think I learned to like mask stuff if I needed to look smarter or bigger or braver than I was.
Mm.
I learned a good way of doing that through maybe my body language or
Mm.
how I would talk or kind of like acting in a way, I suppose. So I think I had an air of confidence all the way from sort of teenager to sort of university. Ended up leaving university to start my first business, and definitely through that I had a very I was confident, don't get me wrong. Like I could go into a room and I could talk and be in there. And at that stage in my life, I genuinely didn't feel anxious or anything. I think I probably just buried those feelings pretty deep or wasn't in touch with them. But it was quite, fake's unfair, because at times it wasn't fake, at times it was real. Brittle is definitely a better word for it, though. I think my confidence was quite brittle and fragile, and there wasn't as much substance to it. And that business in particular was probably one of the first times where my confidence was massively shattered, because it was a failure, just like straight up facts. It just was. There was loads of success in it, and I came a long way and stuff, but it was definitely a failure. And then through Sanctus and struggling with my mental health, which was a big sort of existential crisis really for me, of like, who am I, what am I about? I dropped out of uni to start something, it's not worked out. I've been putting on this front in this bravado of, this is me, I'm this really successful young guy. And then that went, and that sort of was shattered and smashed like a sort of pane of glass. And then through coaching and therapy and group stuff and all just this whole world of self-development that Sanctus opened my eyes to, and loads of different people in the community as well, I feel like I sort of rebuilt a different form of confidence that felt more real and more grounded and much more powerful, actually, in a good way. Like not in like a I don't know, power is a funny word, isn't it? But really, I felt powerful in a good way. Like I felt like I had an authority and a voice, actually. And that felt really, really good. But then to be honest, over the last couple of years, COVID, working remotely, really struggling with the challenges of growing a business and scaling it and running a team, I've definitely been knocked by a lot of that. And I felt underconfident again. So I don't know, I feel like I go on these little oscillating graphs with it, and I'm actually coming back to myself. Now I think in the last couple of weeks I've started to feel much more confident again. So I feel like I've had quite an up and down journey with it, really, where there's sort of, I have moments of peak confidence where I genuinely feel like I can achieve anything, and then I have moments of crippling self-doubt where I think I'm worthless. That's sort of day in the life of, I think.
And I think that's so common, but we just don't talk about it because we're kind of fed this idea of confident is either something you are or you are not. It's something you have or you do not have. And so when we find ourselves in this very human and flowing peaks and troughs, ups and downs, we suddenly think there's something wrong with us, rather than accepting like that is by its very nature how confidence works. Like, it's not a final destination, it's not something you acquire and then have forever. It's like a muscle that you have to build and work on and stretch, and sometimes the conditions are really good for that growth and sometimes they're not, and that's also okay.
100%. And I think one of the things I'm noticing more and more is how my environment or the people I'm around impacts how confident I feel. I think for the first couple of years of Sanctus, I felt extremely confident, beyond confidence, really. It was like a knowing. It was just I felt like I was walking on air. But I look back and I'm like, well, like I was feeling purposeful. I felt like I was in the right place. Like London was the right place for me to be. I was in a new relationship and in love in like a really good way that I'd never been before. I had this wicked team around me that we were all vibing off in Shoreditch. I loved being there. There's loads of reasons why I felt good. And then I actually didn't change a lot, but then COVID, virtual working, suddenly I'm trying to run team meetings from my my kitchen, and yeah, and then I don't feel so confident. So definitely environment has a big impact on me.
Yeah, environment and people. And I think that's something we both, as leaders, as founders, as humans, we both really care about community. Like, it's something that we talk often about, like the power of being somebody who feels almost this, like that purpose of feels so compelled and pulled to create a community around something that we know needs to exist in the world. And I'm really curious to know from you, you know, obviously you're a founder, your business is really focused on mental health. You're a man, but you're also close to me. You're very close to UPFRONT. You know, we've been working together, building a friendship over the last kind of year. And I'd love to know, like, how being exposed to the ideas around UPFRONT has that changed anything for you? Like, what has that, yeah, what's that meant for you in terms of how you see things, think about things? I'd love to hear that.
It's meant a lot, I think, is the first thing to genuinely say. I think when I sort of came across you and I asked Jen I can't really remember. I think I saw Jen share something that you'd shared, and I was like, this just looks sick. Like, I want to meet Lauren, basically.
Another shout out to Jen, my guest yesterday. Jen introduced me to her as well. Jen, we love you.
Yeah, we love you, Jen. I don't, if I'm honest, I don't know if it was necessarily the UPFRONT or you changed anything for me in that moment, but more just crystallized a lot of the reflections or questions or confusions or thoughts I had about, I suppose, about gender, perhaps, for me at that time, and the relationship between men and women. And I think I just saw you and was like, yes, there was something about maybe the way you were speaking or the UPFRONT branding or something that just felt like right to me, I suppose. But I think truthfully, I'd been sort of asking myself a lot of questions and I suppose soul searching a little bit around a lot of these big questions for like a while. And there was just also at that time, like, a year or so ago, I think, or 2 years ago, I can't actually remember the date now, you had like, Sarah Everard, and just like I was in London at that time, and just, yeah, stuff was like staring me in the face, I suppose. And like I couldn't unsee it. And it kind of reminded me in a way of how I felt about mental health, where like suddenly I'd had this experience with mental health, and then, everywhere I looked, I could just see mental health in a way. So yeah, I think, and then that I still feel, I don't know, like I still walk around now and I still ask myself questions about, gender and, like the relationship between men and women, or a woman's experience in the world today. So I almost don't know if I feel changed or if I'm still, my eyes are just getting ever wider, if I'm honest. And I feel like my awareness is okay. And I would love still, if I'm honest, to be more like active. People talk about allyship, I suppose, be more of an ally, let's say.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I feel like I'm at. And that's why I was excited to be here, because I don't feel like I've ever had an opportunity really to, like, I don't know, share my story of that, or even just have like an open conversation with someone who I trust, and I feel like I can go into that with safely. So yeah, a bit of a ramble.
What are your relationships with women like, both like inside and outside of work?
I think to answer that now, it would be better to describe how they were and then answer that now. I mean, growing up for me, I grew up in Stoke, so Stoke is a working class area, I would say. I wouldn't describe my upbringing as working class, however you describe that. You know, it's a podcast for another day. But my dad's a teacher, mum's a nurse. I never went without anything. Like, I had a good upbringing, right? But Stoke itself is a working class area, and here I would say the roles that men take and the roles that men take are very stereotypical. You know, if I went to a pub growing up, you know, the women would sit down and the men would go to the bar and buy the drinks, you know, probably not even ask the women what they want. They'd just come back and they'd get what they're given. That might sound like I'm being damning or hot. That's just what it is. So I grew up with quite stereotypical, quite rigid roles of men and women in my life. And to be honest, at the time, that was no bad thing. I had a lovely upbringing. My mum, extremely caring, and just made me feel incredibly loved. Same with my dad. My dad maybe a little bit more of the disciplinarian. Again, I think that's quite typical. Or at least that was typical for a lot of people I knew. And at school, I was definitely, one of the lads, I would say, football, in the football team, basically, which is what one of the lads meant, I think, at my school. And, we would, on the playground, went to a mixed state school, Catholic school, me and the lads would stand in a circle and play football and wouldn't talk to girls. Like, we
sounds very like my experience.
Yeah, like my growing up for me, honestly, I would talk to a girl if I wanted to have some sort of romantic relationship with her. I did have friends that were girls, but it was almost like, not that it wasn't allowed, but it certainly was a bit like not frowned upon either. And again, I don't want to make it sound like I grew up in an absolute workhouse, because I of course didn't, but that is kind of how it was. Like, definitely the lad culture I was in just wasn't very feminine, straight up, so it's quite rigid for what we did as lads. We played football, we went out and got drunk, basically, and we talked about girls and about basically getting with girls, if I'm honest, as a teenage and a young guy. And some of us would maybe have some actual friendships with girls, but it wasn't. And to be honest, I just think that, like, that's how it was, and I've just not really seen like much else. Really, just almost quite separate. That's how I just saw men and women, I think, growing up, just quite separate, each fulfilling particular roles, and just not much crossover. Really, not much diversity for me. And even my early sort of, and again, then I went to university and I entered the startup world. And to be honest, that was just compounded, because I probably just saw the same thing again, really. Wasn't in my first startup, wasn't exposed to many women, a few, but in a way, like, they just didn't feel much different. If I'm honest, like, it was, I don't know.
And how is it now? Because it's not that now.
Completely different. I mean, completely different. I mean, the last 6 years, I've just been exposed to more diversity in my work and personal life than I had in 25, like, by an absolute mile. And to be fair, I think that started with me, because as I was struggling with my mental health, a lot of the introspection I did was about tapping into a completely different side of me, which was, you would probably describe as feminine. Like, creative, actually being like compassionate to myself, actually being kind to myself, being vulnerable, accepting just all these different parts of myself that had massively been buried. So I think it started there, and then through Sanctus, and through that as a big community, I just met, women that I'd never met before, basically, and men, gay men. I'd hardly met a gay man before. But in particular, of all the different types of people I met, I think in particular Sanctus opened my eyes to just women. It feels so weird to say, and it's hard being here because I'm imagining how people listen to this. I'm tempted to feel embarrassed, but I'm just being straight up honest that like I just honestly feel like I met different women through Sanctus that just massively just opened my eyes. And also in my relationship with Sarah, met a very different woman, or different, I don't know, a different expression of a woman, let's say. And then that just opened my eyes, I suppose, because I'd just not really met many different types of women before.
Yeah. And I think I hear your kind of fear, if you like, of gosh, when you say this out loud, what does it sound like?
Yeah.
How will people judge that? But I really quite deeply believe that is what you're describing is a very, very common experience for people of our age who grew up in areas of the country like the ones where we grew up. So I think, there's power in that honesty. And that's why we wanted to have this conversation, right? Like so much of course, at Upfront, we have decided to focus our work on women, but that doesn't mean that we think this problem doesn't affect men. Like all of the ways we talk about how broken confidence is and what this kind of very patriarchal, narrow view of what a confident person looks and sounds like, that is harming men and boys as well, of course. And I would love to hear from you, like how you see that harm showing up in whether it's your life, your friend's life, the kind of men and boys who you love and spend time with. Like, how does that harm come to life, do you think?
I mean, I speak about myself because I think that's easiest. I mean, I look at the boy I was, frankly, before Sanctus. I wasn't a man. I was absolutely a boy. And I look at myself there, and I honestly just look at like a lost pup, just with no idea really just how to like connect. And because I had been just trying to like living in a very narrow existence of what I suppose I believed a man was, really. A very narrow, be strong, be a rock, be, have this like sort of bravado and this brashness, be, all smiley, get the drinks into the bar, like make good money, be up for it, whatever up for it means, like, work hard, play hard, like that was who I was. And I don't want to do a massive disservice to that version of me, because he was a great guy. Like I had loads of mates and like,
I'd like to go on a night out with them.
But just that, but try and expand that out, and then say to that person, that version of me would never have, I don't know, I wouldn't have gone to like see a play. If someone said to me, "Oh, do you want to go and see this like quite random, like off the wall play?" It would have been, "Oh, no, I don't do." So just really just narrow. And what that meant is that all these different parts of myself that really wanted to live were repressed or depressed, you could say. And that's what that led me to feel like. It led me to feel depressed, anxious, stressed, panic attacks, because all these different parts of me that want to exist and flourish, I am basically pushing down. So, I think this version of like what a man is and these rigid roles are harmful to us all. And I think I definitely felt harmed, by myself, and by the groups and the environments and the cultures that, I suppose I was part of creating, and we were all creating together, like this kind of, toxic lad culture that can also be absolutely wonderful and have an amazing sense of camaraderie about it. But yeah, it was harming me because I wasn't bringing different parts of myself. Like I wasn't being creative or vulnerable or asking for help or exploring passions or interests. There's very little safety or room to express. And yeah, I see that now. Like it still worries me now. I look at men and I look at what this slim definition of a man is, and I think about what's lost, and there's a lot being lost. And then for me, that's a very clear segue into some men's treatment of women.
Yeah,
it's just to me, it's completely obvious,
100%.
So it sort of, and I know that, and I see that because I feel like I've lived it, to be honest. Like I think, yeah, like how I felt about myself, who I thought I was, the small view I had of myself meant that I engaged and connected with women in a very limited way. And that's sad, that's sad. It means that I wasn't getting the, full connection of, and I think, and again, I mean, meeting someone, I mean, friendships, I mean, learning from people, I mean, in all different sort of ways. So yeah, it feels really harmful to me.
Is it something that you and your friends talk about?
No, not really. No, not really. No, not really.
Yeah.
I think there's a much, and this is not just in my friendship group. I see that. I think this is across the board. I do believe there's a much greater appreciation of the female experience now, that men are more empathetic towards. Has that yet truly moved the dial in how men bond with one another, treat each other, and then in turn connect and treat women? Marginally, maybe 1%, but no, I don't think so, really. Yeah,
because it's, I mean, I've shared this with you, that often clients will say to us, well, do you run bonds for men, or what do you have for our male populations? And for me, I think men have to want to do this work. Like they want to have to show up and be engaged in these conversations and do the often very uncomfortable work of kind of unpicking the part that they play in these harmful systems.
Yeah.
And from my vantage point, I don't see or hear the desire to do that from men very loudly, from where I kind of stand in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what do you see and hear from where you're standing? Because there's a lot more men in your eye line than mine.
Yeah, no, I see. I really feel like I completely fully see the male experience of living in this world right now, the world where it is, say, I don't know, Western world or British or whatever you want to call it. I really see that experience. I see I see lots of fear, I see lots of insecurity, I see lots of judgment, I see lots of doubt, I see lots of guilt, I see lots of like confusion about privilege, but also suffering, and like the relationship of how can I be really privileged but feel like I'm suffering, like that weird feeling. So I really feel like I see that. I see this very kind of confusing dynamic where, you know, I understand, and I think a lot of us, I feel like I'm speaking on behalf of men here, but understand that men have it very good, right, in the world. It's been designed by men. Let's see that. Yet then there's still a lot of suffering in men. So men might get it sort of like not practically good, or they might have this status or this power, and be in powerful positions and have money and wealth and stuff. Yeah. Do I see much conversation about men's emotions? No. Do I see much space for that? No. Do I see any male role models leading that conversation? No. So it's like men almost, again, I'm speaking very broadly here. It's as if men have got these great riches and wealth, yet like emotionally, it's actually barren. Like it's totally barren. Like, yeah, you've got a few people like me, or a few the odd coach who pops up on LinkedIn and talks about men and shame and vulnerability and all that. But tiny, yeah. Look, you know, I hope you know, whatever. I'd love to lead the way, and you know, whatever. But I look at role models for men. I couldn't name one. I not hands down could not name one. Like seriously, I couldn't name one. You know, look at politicians, look at sports people, I just like barren, totally barren. So like I really feel like I see that experience, and then I see also a lot of men, and I felt like this, feeling like they've got a target on their back, like feeling, especially a lot of men in leadership positions, just feeling like, you know, the world is waiting for me to put my foot wrong, like. So I really see that experience, and I can be deeply empathetic to men because I can. Would I expect, you know, a woman or a person of color to be that empathetic towards? No, of course, no. I mean, if you've got enough in your cup to give that, brilliant. I mean, that is incredible. But would I expect that en masse? No, I wouldn't. So,
so what do we, because part of our, it's not sneaky, because I'm going to just say it out loud now, one of the reasons we wanted to do this conversation is because we hope that lots of the men who are in your orbit and in your community will listen to this podcast, and I'm probably sure 99.9% of them will never have listened to any previous episodes, and I hope they stick around and listen to the rest. What do you want to say to the men who are listening, who are feeling that fear, the judgment, the guilt, the inability to connect, the shame?
I mean, yeah, I mean, for me, like, again, as someone who feels like I am on some sort of path with regards that feels good for me to be on. I know that, like, I've had to do a lot of work and ask myself a lot of questions about my relationship with women historically. The you know, the relationships between men and women I've seen in my life. So whether that's my parents or other relationships that have been role modeled to me. And yeah, I feel like I've had to work through a lot of that. Like, you know, there are ways I've treated women in the past that, you know, in relationships or whatever, that I'm not proud of, that I was carrying a lot of shame about, or guilt. And, you know, I've let a lot of that go, and that wasn't easy. That took time. And yeah, as a result of doing that, I feel like I've dropped any, like, I don't know, like bitterness I had towards women, which I do think some men carry in some way, or angst, or also like bitterness about my life that then made me unable to empathize with someone else. So like if I'm feeling scarce, if my life's hard, if I'm depressed, I'm anxious, like, you know, the world's out against me, I would probably respond to something that Upfront put out and just be like, oh, fuck off. What, you want more attention, do you? Right? That is a response that you will get. Whether you get it overtly or you get it in someone's mind, that is the response you would get from men. Now, I won't respond like that to Upfront and to other, you know, not just, and this goes beyond women as well, but because I'm resourced, like, and actually I feel like I don't know, I've been able to like heal some of my wounds or grow. And I think that's what needs to happen for men. Like, I just think there's a load of baggage there that a lot of men maybe haven't had the opportunity to work through, which then means there's an empty cup and there's not much to give from. And maybe there's also some, like, you know, some stuff in one's past about women, right? About old relationships, parental dynamics, like, or, you know, the masculine and feminine parts of yourself, like, were you called gay at school? All these, like, loads of this stuff that just builds up and it builds up and it completely blinkers, you know, one's outlook of the world. So I think it requires like some healing, basically, coaching, therapy, journaling. And then what I would hope to happen much more organically, really, which I think is as impactful, if not more, but again, you've got to be open, is I'd love more men to just actually spend more time with women, like, you know, in professional work, in creative work, in, you know, in friendships, like that, because that's properly, it's diverse, isn't it? You know.
And I think that also applies to your diet, your life diet, if you like. It's like the books you read and the songs you listen to. And, you know, Chris and I talk about it a lot, because Chris is, so for example, he started climbing recently, so wants to go on Instagram, find professional climbers to follow, YouTubers, people to be inspired by, books to read. And he was saying to me, like, just he had to work so much harder to find women, because all of the algorithms, every website, everywhere he looked was pushing a white middle-class man at him. And he's trying to find, you know, the young Black woman who's queer or whatever that might look like. And it's just incredibly hard, but it's also very doable. You know, it's like, do the extra Googling, take the extra few steps. And, you know, the stats around how many men have even read a book written by a woman,
I was just about to say that.
Staggering.
I mean, I would say that in my words, in my like layman's words, that maybe like men, you know, the men that I know would understand, is do stuff that women do, or read stuff that women say, or like spend time with women. Like, I've been lucky in a sense, but because of mental health in particular, and because of me getting very into, you know, self-development, there's a lot of practices that are naturally more feminine, that are then often led by women. So go to a yoga class as an example. I've been in many a yoga class where I'm the only guy in there. Right? Not so much now, it's changing a bit, but when I first started going to yoga, I'd often be the only guy in there, and I might notice that, bloody hell, they're flexible. My genitalia is definitely different, you know, like fine. That is a massive experience for me, because I don't get
the
that a lot.
minority also.
I'm in
Like,
the
how it feels
minority.
to be
When
in the
does that happen?
minority.
Exactly. So, but that's incredibly healthy. Learn a lot. Yoga, as an example, is a great practice, right? Yeah, had the exact same. Like, I read a lot. I love reading. I particularly like reading classic books, but classic books are all written by white men, because that's who's been writing history. So, you know, for me, if I'm just forget all the moral, ethical, from my heart reasons why I want this movement to happen, just from a purely intellectual perspective, I'm like, well, yeah, I should probably read some stuff that women have written, because that'd be interesting. You know, like, genuinely just as simple as that. But more than that, because again, that's growth for me. Like, I am growing. I am growing a different side to myself. So yeah, spending, I don't know. I think a lot of men though just get really challenged by women, so kind of back off straight away from there.
But we're starting to paint the picture of how we want the world to be, right? Which is a big it's what we do as founders and people who build new things in the world. And we're on a mission to support 1 million women. So how, from your vantage point, how do you think the world will be different when we achieve that goal?
I was thinking about this in the shower earlier. I think there's a couple of things. The first one, which would be great if you could just get on with this, would be just see more female leaders. First, like, that is the first one for me, and more, more female CEOs, more female leaders in general, founders, whatever. But I suppose if I was being even more like deep, let's say, it would actually be more feminine leaders. I hope more of those are women, but actually,
it's regardless of sex,
a man, like a white male CEO, like, I don't know, just not being this like typical alpha aggressor, like showing up in a different way with compassion, with care, with kindness. Yeah, like just more feminine leadership in the world, more room for femininity, full stop, really, to be honest. That would just be way better. Like, yeah, I mean, I'm just fully loaded in this. Like, I literally, it's funny, I'm going to, on Saturday, I'm going to an acting class, and I've wanted to pursue acting, or at least go to an acting class or something, since I was about 13. Because when I was 13, my English teacher, Miss Beeson, asked me to be in the school play, and I said no, because I was scared. Because I was scared of getting the piss taken out of me. Right? Drama, it's feminine. The only other person that liked drama at school was a young lad called David, who was gay, who basically got bullied. So we need this for kids. We need it for young me, so I can actually go to my drama class and not feel like I'm going to get ripped by my mates, so that they felt like they could explore some of their other passions and hobbies that maybe weren't available to them. Like, yeah, we fully need it for the world to be a more harmonious, compassionate place. Yeah, that's what I'd like to see.
Well, I hope little James enjoys his acting class on Saturday.
He'll be there.
He'll be there with his bright orange shirt.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say, sorry to in response, is I actually think, I'd like to see more. I'd like to see men more able to connect with one another in ways that are like healthy, that aren't 6 pints down the pub or whatever it might be, and that because that just feels like a root cause, really, that isn't really being attended to right now, and it concerns me, because I just feel like it's getting more shameful in a way, which means things are just being pushed more, like down and down more. It just worries me. It's one for another day maybe, but I would like to see that. I really would.
Me too. And thank you for the part you play in Upfront's growth and clarity, and what our relationship gives to me as the founder driving this. I really appreciate you.
Well, thanks for leading the way. Like I feel like I'm following you. Honestly, where you go is, opens doors for me. And like in our relationship, like there's things you've said to me where I'm like, oh God, yeah. It's like, though she's a great example. I honestly think at 25, if me and you had have had a relationship, it would have been, I wish it would have been different. Like you would have, if we were to have one, like I feel like you would have, like, I would never have been able to meet you where you were at, and you would have had to become quite laddie and jokey. Do you know what I mean? And like banter to get me to get me there. And so.
Which, don't get me wrong, I am very funny, but I don't like punch.
You are extremely funny. No, I know. But yeah, there's like for example, even when we were doing this podcast, you asked me to come on the podcast, and I said to you, like, I'm nervous because, I feel like, I don't know, like sometimes I feel like whatever I might say could be used against me or whatever, and then I can't remember exactly what you said, even though it definitely completely stayed with me and made me do it, which was like, yeah, but is that not worth it, basically? And is that not what other people experience? And I was just like, well, yeah. Which again is testament to having a relationship with someone who is different to me, right? And hopefully us both learning from one another. Yeah, like.
And I'm glad that you shared that, because I think that is part of where the hesitancy to engage in this conversation comes from. It's part of the fear. And, I would say to any men listening in who are feeling that you are not alone in that fear. That is a fear that all of us have when we're engaging in conversations that center our privilege.
Yeah.
But you really don't have any other choice. Like, it is, for all the beautiful things that James and I have just described and this incredible world we're trying to build, it is necessary for you to, even for your want to be just 1 millimeter bigger than the fear, so that you can start to have those conversations.
Yeah, I just felt like for me to avoid being open to kind of being, like, let's say, put on the spot a little bit, that I am keeping myself safe and I'm not creating any chance for like something new to happen. And like, that's just like not fair, because that's just classic me keeping it all to myself. Like, I keep myself where I am, but I don't make any changes because the way it is currently serves me. I mean, one thing I often think about is I don't have kids, but I honestly just think about, like, if I had a daughter, I just think about it all the time. I just literally think, what world would I want my daughter to come into, or the family member. I've got two. What is it if your cousin has a kid? Second cousin, let's say. Yeah, two twin girls, and I just think, what, I would, I'd like those two to be able to walk down the street, at night safe. and not feel scared. Yeah, that'd be really good, and feel like they could be the CEO of a FTSE 500 business at the same time.
And then you've got my wee boy who thinks you're great, and he's still coming home every day. So and so thinks I'm a girl. So and so called me a girl today.
Exactly.
Because he has long hair.
Yeah, I'd love Atlas to feel like he could have a long hair and still be a man. That's why we're doing it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, James, as always. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks very much.
I'll see you back in WhatsApp.
See you later.
Bye.